to remind each other what our purpose here. Our purpose is to model generative dialogue between people about racial injustice, and I hope tonight's conversation is going to inspire you as you do your own work in community and with others. So, you know, talking about racism can be uncomfortable, but it's not going to kill us. So I'm positive that all of us are still going to be alive at 7:15-ish when we wrap this up. I do want to remind you that this week and throughout the month of August, we will also gather on Thursday nights at 7 o'clock for facilitated breakout groups to continue the conversation that begins on Sundays. We just had our first one this past Thursday. It was led by Rebecca Chancellor Six, my colleague, and it was a fruitful time that we spent together. So you can check the website if you'd like to register for that. Next Sunday night, we'll have the Reverend Amy Miracle with us. She's the senior pastor at Broad Street Presbyterian Church in Columbus, Ohio. And so I invite you to join us for that. You can register on our website there as well. Tonight, please do use the chat mechanism that's there in Zoom if you'd like to share feedback or post any of your questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can, but I'll go ahead and apologize in advance because we have not been able to get to all of them during our times together on Sunday nights. If you want to remain anonymous, you can email Mary Elaine directly. She'll post her email address in the chat stream now. Before we get started and I introduce our guest tonight, I do need to extend a special thanks to Conrad and Ellen Masterson and Becky and Larry Sykes for their gentle nudge and to me to make sure I find a way to connect with our guest tonight. So they were great. I'm grateful to them for the idea and for also the introduction to our guest tonight. Our guest is Ambassador Ron Kirk. Ron Kirk is Senior of Counsel in Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher's Dallas and Washington, D.C. offices. Right now, Ambassador Kirk focuses on providing strategic advice to companies with global interests, which sounds like a very, very important position there. So he served as mayor of Dallas from 1995 to 2001 and as Secretary of State in 1994. He was appointed by Governor Ann Richards. Ambassador Kirk was born and raised in Austin, Texas. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and sociology from a Presbyterian school in Sherman, Texas. It goes by the name of Austin College. He received his law degree from the University of Texas Law School in the late 1970s. Ambassador Kirk and his wife have 2 adult daughters, and so extend a special First Presbyterian Church of Dallas welcome to you. Ron, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Good to be with you, and I'm glad that we can finally say to Ellen and Becky Sykes, and I have to say to my beloved partner in crime and politics, Carol Reed, who I know was also a longtime member of your church as well, but you were every bit as good as they advertised. So it's always good to be with our friends and family at First Presbyterian.
Yes. Well, I gave a little bit of your bio, but most people, some people will only know you as the one-time mayor of Dallas. Tell us a little bit about what you've done since then.
Well, most recently, I've just been involved in practicing law, a number of business ventures. After my tenure as mayor, I think you might not know. And do I call you, now you went through what to call me, do I call you Reverend or Pastor or Amos?
You just go with Amos, yeah.
But I stepped down to run for the U.S. Senate, which was eventful in that I won the Democratic nomination, but ultimately lost. But in that process, I befriended a young state senator from Chicago by the name of Barack Obama, who also had ambitions to run for the U.S. Senate. And that friendship sort of evolved over the years. And after he was elected president in 2008, he asked me to join his administration. And when you're asked by your president, no matter which party or philosophy to serve, I'm one of those that believes there's only one answer. So I said yes, and was somewhat fortunate that no one They hadn't selected anyone for the international trade portfolio. So I became our 16th U.S. trade representative, which is how I have the rank of ambassador. And that was just an incredible experience to be a part of the public face of the United States around the world. But after one term, I returned home to Dallas to practice law. I've devoted probably half of my professional life to public service. So now I'm engaged in law practice and a number of business ventures. Perhaps the most high profile your members might be interested in is we're still chugging along, no pun intended, with the group that's trying to bring high-speed rail to Texas.
You were telling me when we were talking on the phone earlier that one of the only time that you've been to Ethiopia, where I'm from, was as a U.S. trade representative, I believe. What was that trip like? What was that experience like? And was there anything that you remember that was formative to your understanding of who you were, like your own identity?
You know, I've always found it fascinating. And you mentioned that I was raised in Austin, and I'm 66 years old. I turned 66 in June. And I'll simplify it, for you, for those that are with us. If you think about it, that means I was born in 1954. I was born the year of Brown versus Board of Education. And so I am very much a product of the civil rights movement and a first generation beneficiary of everything my parents fought and dreamed of. And, and I have to, pay homage to John Lewis for all he did to make what I've been able to do in my life possible, along with Dr. King and Thurgood Marshall and so many others. But not only that, were we the sort of test tube babies of the desegregation movement, I'm old enough to have been born colored, then Negro, and then, we went through the whole, are we Black, are we African American? And my father, was that generation, twice removed from slavery. And it was interesting. He always said he thought it might have been the worst thing that happened when we decided to define ourselves as African American versus Black. For the sad reality, most people of color in the United States, most people that self-define ourselves as African American really have never been to Africa. We don't have any firsthand relations, and because of just of the many horrors of slavery, so many of our ancestors were ripped from their families and don't know. So I didn't know that. But anyway, to your question, for those of us that have had a chance to go to Africa, it can be a very overpowering experience. You tend to look in the face of everyone you meet and wonder, is this where I'm from? Or is this where I'm from? And I remember my first trip that I led as mayor, I deliberately led the city's first trade mission ever to South Africa. And we traveled to South Africa and Zimbabwe. What I found interesting is everywhere I went, at least Africans, maybe it's because I went as somebody of some accomplished, but at least everybody claimed me. So in Ghana, they tell me I'm a son of Ghana, and they said the same thing in Kenya. But Ethiopia was fascinating to me because I look at Africa, and for whatever you think Africa needs to kind of fully progress, one of its challenges is, the largest continent that's not a unified governing body. But if Africa is going to modernize, have the sort of economic growth a lot of us have longed for, I just always do simple math. I mean, Ethiopia is a powerhouse. So is South Africa. So are, Kenya and Ghana. And one
Are you still there, Ambassador Kirk?
Oh, I hope so. And am I frozen?
I've got your voice. You froze up. You got the Zoom freeze going on, but I can hear you for sure. You still there? Okay, yeah, there you go. So I think Ambassador Kirk's Ron will jump off and then come back on. So we'll just wait 1 second for him to do that. That's usually the fix when it comes to Zoom, is to just stop and start back over. Do want to encourage y'all to ask questions if you've got them. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can tonight. And then some of the discussion that we'll continue on Thursday night with our talk back sessions. Certainly want to encourage you to register for that as well. So, all right.
Yeah, I'm going to switch to my iPad, my laptop, for whatever reason. Is this better?
Yeah, I can hear you again.
Hold on. I'm going to have to just give me one minute. I apologize.
Okay. No problem. No problem.
I want to make sure I log off of the other one so we don't get that boom back effect. And I will try to get this. Now I do feel like my mother, who was a victim of every bit of technology he ever tried to incorporate. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Certainly can.
Anyway, I think we were talking about my visit to Africa.
Sure.
But anyway, Ethiopia was fascinating to me on multiple fronts, because in addition to being potentially, a next growth economy, spiritually, it's an interesting place because it's sort of, where Christianity and Islam met, and there's the rich religious history. Yes. At least there is this belief that is it the covenant of the covenant
Ark of the Covenant. Yeah.
The Ark of the Covenant is held in this mosque, which I traveled all the way to see. But then you get there and they tell you can't see it. You can't go in the mosque, and literally only one priest whose job it is to protect the covenant gets to see it once every 100 years. So I'm guessing none of them ever see it if it's not cumulative. So I enjoyed giving the president quite a bit of grief about whether or not the cup was actually there, or this was just a marketing ploy. But it was fascinating. But I loved meeting the people. I hope you don't take offense, because I know you're a proud son of Ethiopia. But when I'm asked what I learned from my travels, and the one I tell people is that I still think most Americans, and perhaps certainly our kids, take for granted or are not fully aware of just how richly blessed we are in this country. Yeah. And you don't know poverty until you've been to some parts of the developing world, particularly in India and Africa, and whatever our challenges are in this country, whether it's equity or racism or otherwise, most people in the world, most people in the developing world would give anything to trade places with us. And that's why I think these conversations about race in our country, no matter how difficult as they are important, because I think what distinguishes us, what separates us from other countries, is we have a founding document that lays out this beautiful idea of what America should be. And it should be an American that all of God's children, every person, has the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. We know from our experience, the practice of that has not always been the same. It did not always include women. It certainly didn't include people of color. But what makes us unique is our willing to hold up in America a mirror to that promise and say, here's where we've fallen short. And having courageous people willing to raise their voice for a fairly simple proposition, that until all of us are free, all of us have the ability to achieve based on the merits of our intellect and our work ethic, and not be limited by someone else's defined opinion of what it is a person of color or an immigrant or a woman can be. Until we get to that point, then we fall short of that lofty goal. But as and I'm sure all of your members are familiar with the phrase, as Dr. King so beautifully said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but thank God it bends toward justice. And so that is both the challenge and the beauty of this country. And it's why I think conversations like tonight's are so important.
Right. There is, let's go to the reason for our conversation tonight, or why we've been doing these conversations. It's been a little over 70 days since George Floyd was murdered And this isn't a question I ask everybody, but I'll ask you, where were you when you watched the video for the first time?
I'm sure I was home. It was breathtaking in its pain because of the simple inhumanity and lack of any sense of recognition of the dignity of this person whom we watch collectively the life flow out of. And so just that particular act, I think, is what shocked the conscience of so many of us. And the fact that we were in this pandemic, and that, as the Bible and the old folks say, America was still, for a change. But it was, for me, it was sickening. I will tell you, Amos, that I went months that I woke up every day with just a knot in my stomach for the utter disbelief that we could see this. And it was partly the inhumanity of that act. I think there was something different about George Floyd from others. But for an African-American male, it felt like just the bubbling up, almost this volcanic frustration that we've seen this before. The Ahmaud Arbery killing affected me just as powerfully and in a different way, just because I don't know why. When I saw that, the first thing I said to my wife, you do realize, in even a gun crazy state like Texas, the only animal that you can hunt from the back of a truck is a wild hog, because they are so invasive and we see them having no value. And to see these men drive through the streets of their neighborhood as if, they're on a joyride and hunt down a young black kid because they had made a determination that he was a threat to them, was just sickening. And collectively, it isn't that any one of them, caused that almost ulcer, this almost cancer-like I feel that I've been carrying in me. It's that, George Floyd was Eric Garner, and Ahmaud Arbery was, Trayvon Martin and Tamir Rice and Michael Brown. And bless our heart, Breonna Taylor was Tatiana Jefferson. And we've seen this over and over and over again. And I think one of the reasons that the civil unrest has not subsided is there has always been this hope and belief among African Americans in particular that if we could have independent evidence of an accusation of mistreatment by law enforcement, then people would believe us. Because the sad reality for life for most Black people in America is if you have been abused by our policing system, there's a sad belief that you may as well not report it because they're not going to believe you. All of the excuses are built in.
Yeah.
And I think what made George Floyd so compelling, all those excuses and those fictions that we as a community have collectively accepted to say, well, why didn't he stop? Why didn't he obey? Why didn't he pull over? Why did he run? We sat there and watched all of those after having the police recited all of these same defenses that we all saw exposed as a lie. But for Black people in America, there was one disbelief, man, if I don't have somebody else willing to speak up and say something, nobody will believe me. And then we got the camcorders in the police cars. And we thought, well, now evidence. And that didn't work. And then we got body cams. But we found out the officers could turn those off and on. And the first thing people usually say is, well, we haven't seen all of the evidence. Let's see it all.
Yeah.
And so finally, I think it was the brutality, just the lack of any compassion in the eyes of that officer Shaven. But I also think in a perverse way, this pandemic that has been visited on all of the world put us in a position that America could not escape this particular viewing.
Right.
You know, we didn't have to rush off to take our kids to dance class.
Yeah.
We didn't have a Maverick game, a Cowboys game. We didn't have any of the other things that distract us from all the reasons to say, oh, I didn't know, I never heard of it. So, and you'll also find out, Amos, you have to cut me off. But when you asked about George Floyd, I mean, it is even now that I wake up every day that I haven't carried with me that sickness. I don't ever want to forget it. But for the first 4 to 5 months, it just felt like an unnatural act as a Black man to go to work, to go to my corporate meetings, and when everybody said, how you doing? Everything's okay. I just wanted to scream, I'm not okay. Life is not okay. This should not be accepted in what is supposed to be the greatest democracy in the world, and in a country in which half of our political leaders stand up and tout their Judeo-Christian values.
Right.
And so I'm prayerful that maybe this will be different, because we have had all this still, and there does at least seem to be more of a willingness to engage in these kinds of conversations.
Yeah. You spoke of Barack Obama earlier, and there's another iconic. I mean, I remember where I saw the first when I saw George Floyd's when I saw his murder for the first time. I remember where I was. I also remember exactly where I was when on election night. I guess that was 2008, and when Barack Obama and his family were introduced after the election results, after the election was called, and they came out in Hyde Park in Chicago, and you get that memorable image of Jesse Jackson crying and watching. He gave that brief speech. I remember exactly where I was sitting in my friend's home, you know, the spot on their floor. I remember all of us just being speechless for like 30, 45 minutes. Nobody said a word. Just, I can't believe this is happening, you know? Like we couldn't make, it was almost like there was this cathartic silence that came over all of us. Like, and yet now, you know, I cannot figure out for myself if what we're experiencing now is a rejection of the 8 years of Obama's presidency, you know, or reaction to it, or if it's just was it exacerbated by having, you know, the nation's first Black president, or are we in a better place because of that? And I would argue that we're actually in a better place because, like, you know, Black folk like us are like, wait a second, anything's possible now, you know?
Yeah.
We had a president, though. So we're asking for, you know, and expecting certain things that you know, prior to that night in 2008, I would have never, even while the election was going on, right? I actually never thought, I didn't think he would make it to the end, you know, and that he would actually win. I was shocked to see him that night, you know?
I've got to tell you, for once in my political life, I was right. I'm usually wrong. I thought he would win. I thought he was special. I thought the timing was right. But I would say this, all of politics in our country tends to be a pendulum, both politically, ideologically, party-wise. And you know, most of my adult life, I've come of age watching people saying, oh my God, you know, if the Republican Party doesn't do this, they're never going to come back. How will they survive? The Democrats have this structural environment. Now, if the Democrats don't do this, but as Americans, we really do sort of want to walk a middle path, but we swing back and forth. But in terms of race, it's interesting. I managed Texas for the Obama campaign, and it wasn't because I was special, but as you know, most of the Black community was initially for Hillary Clinton. I mean, the Clintons have a very special place in the heart of the Black community. I will never forget having a conversation, you know, with my then 80-something-year-old mother, and I had done a radio interview, you know, and I was just pouring every emotional, you know, argument I could into voting for Obama, and the fact that You know, I never would have dreamed that my daughter, who was then 18, would get to cast her first vote, and I would be voting, and my, 80-something-year-old mother would be voting for potentially the first Black president. And I finished the interview, and I thought, man, I knocked that out of the park. Yeah. And my sister calls and says, I'm guessing you haven't talked to your mother, have you? So I called my mother, and she says, you're the one that brought Hillary Clinton to my living room. And she said to me, when my mother's passed away, she said, plus, and whenever she knew she was wrong, she always blamed it on her next door neighbor, our neighbor. But she says, Irene says he's a Muslim. And I said, Mother, he's not a Muslim, but even if he was, it was okay. Right. But the point is, we had this huge hill to climb, but we climbed it. I thought he was the right person in the right time. And the reality was, after the experience of what we thought a bad presidency looked like to George Bush, we obviously had no idea what the floor is compared to where we are now. But it was pretty likely we would win. But I'll go back to your point. I remember that night, and we deliberately chose to watch it with just a couple of friends. And there were only 4 couples, and we were with, I think, Mayor, you told me you visited with Mayor Rollins and his wife and 2 other friends, because we wanted to be together, and we had decided not to go to Chicago. And I remember thinking, one, this is a uniquely American phenomenon, because this didn't happen in almost any other country in the world, because the reality, most of them are politically, ethnically homogenous. Be very difficult for someone from Eritrea to go to Ethiopia and become elected president. And the world celebrated that. It was at least a step toward that American dream. And we, for 1 minute, I remember telling my girls, we all set aside our political party affiliation, our ideology, our ethnicity, and just celebrated what was a uniquely American achievement for what it was. And I remember the cameras going all around the country, particularly at schools, and just the joyfulness of that evening. Yeah. But I will also never forget the next morning, because I woke up, read everything, I wanted to see everything and doing. And one of the commentators on one of the national news programs says, we have had an opportunity to witness the very best of America. But he says, you should make no mistake about it. I'm afraid we're also going to see the worst of America. Wow. Because that strain of Karenism, of lack of caring, of a need to self-identify and to continue to hold immigrants, women, people of color now, it feels like it has exploded back on our scene. And I think what troubles us is, were we wrong about the achievement we made collectively as a country in terms of President Obama? No, we were not. Were we too quick to believe that we had entered a period of what some were saying, post-racialism? We absolutely were. Yeah. And I remember I deliberately tuned into Rush Limbaugh because I wanted to see what he said. And the bottom line, he just excoriated this guy. And he said, I hope he fails. And knowing the people who listened to Limbaugh and all of those others of that ilk at that time, I took the time like you to celebrate that moment, but I didn't think for a minute it would go away. We didn't talk about it because we didn't want to. He never wanted people to be pitied. And, the words were, oh, the president sees no more threats. The amount of death threats that he received compared to any other president was unprecedented and off the charts. Yeah. The sternest talking to that I got from my security team was what they perceived was my casualness in believing that I needed them to be with me all the time. And I remember after I'd been in about 6 months, the head of my security detail, who was white, says, we love working with you because you're down to earth. You're a mayor. You love people. He says, but I'm not sure you fully understand. You're working for the first Black president of the United States. And there are people out there who hate him and are plotting every day to think of any harm they could do to him. And they are reasonably certain that they cannot get to the president of the United States, but they can damn sure get to Eric Holder, and they can damn sure get to you. Wow. So when we tell you that we need you to follow these protocols, we need you to do it. And it was sobering. I'd had, police protection when I was mayor, but in the broader context, it just brought home both sides, I guess, of that coin of what that achievement was about.
Yeah. Mm. When we talked a couple weeks ago, you made this distinction between being the first Black mayor of Dallas and the fourth, or I don't remember. You said it was either fourth or
fifth
Black mayor of Dallas, Black mayor from Dallas. Tell us about the distinction between the two, being of Dallas and from Dallas, and what.
Well, it is the privilege of a lifetime, and I told you, I love to be mayor. It is the one job that I ran. As my then 8-year-old daughter told me after I lost my Senate race, she said, "Why didn't you keep that job the governor gave you?" And I was like, "Well, because the ones you fight for mean more." But I loved being mayor, and I know it was a big thing for Dallas, in our own way, and particularly for people who grew up here, for Dallas to elect someone of color. But I was always careful to put it in the context of what I started talking about. I am a beneficiary of everything my parents and John Lewis and Martin Luther King fought for. And the one thing my father cautioned my sisters and brothers and I before we started to integrate the public schools. And I always found it an interesting term. We didn't call it integration, we called it desegregation. But my father said, "I'm proud of you. We have great expectations for you. We're going to protect you. You're going to get to do things we never dreamed of. You're going to get to be the first at a lot of things, but I always want you to keep in mind that you have to conduct yourself in a way that you can't be the last." And while he was proud of us, he also let us know, you all are the beneficiaries of this gift of time. Mm-hmm. And so when I define myself as the first first Black mayor of Dallas, one, I do it in the context of educating people that Tom Bradley from Calvert, Texas, Maynard Jackson, who was born in Dallas, Emmanuel Cleaver, who was born in Waxahachie, Willie Brown, who's from Mejia, all had to leave Texas because of Jim Crow, like so many of my older siblings. And, we know about the migration. We talk more about the migration in this country of Blacks from the South going to, say, Chicago and Detroit. We don't talk as much about the Western migration. Most of our relatives went to California because they thought they'd have greater opportunities. And my point is that, but for the total arbitrariness and overt prejudice of Jim Crow, Tom Bradley could have done everything he did for LA in becoming the first Black mayor of Los Angeles and a hair's breadth of being the first Black governor. We are at a church, so I can say, and I think a lot of your listeners know, Maynard Jackson was born in Dallas. His father and grandfather founded New Hope Baptist Church over on Metropolitan Avenue. And as we know, he led Atlanta through absolutely a cultural renaissance. At 34 years old, transformed them from a city associated with Stone Mountain, Georgia, and the Klan to the city too busy to hate, and ultimately the home of the Olympics and this great mecca of modern American capitalism. Emmanuel Cleaver, a United Methodist minister from Waxahachie and a graduate of Prairie View A&M, left Dallas, moved to Kansas City, led their economic rebirth and served as mayor. And Willie Brown, was born in Mejia, left here to go to California, became the longest tenured speaker in the history of the California Assembly, and then the first Black mayor of San Francisco. So I always make that reference, Amos, for two things: to get in both the history lesson, underscore the point that people will plant where they are flowered, and that I owe a debt to those who came before me to make sure that I was a good steward of the privileges that I had.
Mm-hmm. What about it? I mean, what did you learn in your time as mayor of Dallas? And especially your experience leading the police, well, I guess in Dallas, the police chief reports to the city manager, not to the mayor. But was there in your, I don't know, this sounds like a loaded question. Somebody just asked in the chat, is there anything in your time, from your time as mayor, that would give you a reason to believe that we are in need of restructuring or reform with our law enforcement?
But say yes, it's a complex question. And one, we live with this fiction that because we have a council management form of mayor, and yes, the city manager runs and should run the day-to-day affairs of the city. But the first person I met, other than John Ware, who I was fortunate to have a close personal relationship, and John Ware was our city manager at the time. But I sat down with our police chief, and it was about Ben Click. He was a fanatical proponent and evangelist for community policing. And in my conversation with him, I said, look, if the day that I believe I know more about policing than you is the day I need a new police chief, because that's your job. I know how structurally this is supposed to work, but I always want you to feel like you have an open door to come to me and tell me what we need to keep our city safe, because public safety is at the core of what our responsibility is as elected officials. And if you don't get the policing right, you can't do anything, as we've seen exploded everywhere. And we were fortunate in that, and I want to make it plain, Dallas had incidents of police brutality every bit on par with everything we've seen here. Right. We had the killing of an 80-year-old woman when I worked for the city in the 80s by the name of Etta Collins, who called the police because she thought somebody was breaking into her house. And the police went to her house in South Dallas and shot her through her screen door. And then 2 weeks later, they shot a 90-year-old a black man who was suffering from dementia and waving a gun in a parking lot. Then we had 3 police officers gunned down downtown. So we had been through all of that, but we had begun at least to learn and try to do community policing, build those relationships, and repair those. And there's no one that I have more respect for than the young men and women who take on the very brutal responsibility of trying to keep us safe. But I also know that we have to hold them to a higher standard, because the reality, most of the people we recruit to the police academy are 21, 22, 23 years old. And we are giving them the power of God once we have them raise that oath and swear them in as a peace officer and put that 45 on their hip. So I don't think it is an anachronism to say we can back the blue, but we can also hold them accountable. Right. And the one thing we have to get away from is this rhetoric that it's either or. Right. Either you support the police or you're against them. That's right. Bull. Uh-huh. And that's what angers me so much about the tone we're hearing from the White House and others that want to politicize this as that holding the police accountable and responsible for their bad behavior is somehow indicative of a lack of respect for law enforcement. It's nothing more, nothing further from the truth. You can do both, and you have to do both. But our challenge as a community is that we don't want to get involved in these issues. We don't want to believe the history of policing in America, which was actually born out of slavery. I mean, all you've got, don't trust me. Go do your research and understand where the initial police and law enforcement pieces were put in place after slavery as a way to corral and track down freed slaves and hold us in line. There is a long legacy of racism in policing in America. And one of our challenges is every time we go through these moments, very quickly, the police associations, and I'm going to, I'm going to be brutally honest here. I feel very differently about the police unions than I do the individual men and women on the street. The police associations that they're doing now, and I challenge those who are with us, go back and look how quickly the head of the police union in Minneapolis wanted to turn that into, why is everybody against us? Why is everybody doing it? Because you won't speak up and you won't hold your own brothers accountable for behavior that is clearly criminal and outside the norms of decency. And typically when we get to the point where we are now, and we've done it in Dallas, we do it in every community, there is the predictable campaign to go tie a ribbon around your tree to show you respect the police. There's some version of a back the blue campaign. We make it a binary choice, which it is not. And our community now that you have seen these lies exposed, as you did in the killing, the murder of George Floyd, in which the police used all those excuses they always do. As a person of faith, a person of conscience, of intellect, it should make you question now how easily you accepted those every time before. It doesn't mean all police are bad. It doesn't mean we don't respect law enforcement. We do need them, but it does mean you have to give those your fellow citizens the benefit of the doubt. And I also I was trying to think, there was one other point that I wanted to make when you were asking, should we fund or not? I hate the fact that we have so politicized the quote unquote defund the police issue. Because what I've told people is, I don't want you to defund the police. I want you to do what the police have asked us to do. And I would remind those who are with us of that horrible tragedy we had in Dallas in 2017, when 5 of our bravest men and women who serve us were gunned down on the streets of Dallas. And our country rallied around Dallas. We rallied around our police chief, David Brown, who made a very emotional plea when people asked him, what can we do? And what David Brown asked is basically what, ironically, the activists are now asking for. David Brown said, stop making us be everything to everybody. Right. We have a loose dog problem. You want us to become dog catchers. We have a mental health problem. Now we have to be mental health experts. We have a homeless problem. If you think about it, the police have been pleading for the same thing that now the activists are, is instead of trying to cram all of that funding into a police function and expect that now 23-year-old to show up and know, am I dealing with the domestic disturbance, mental health issue, a drug issue, a homeless issue? How about if we really had trained mental health experts who work as civilians to show up? How about if we have people who are trained in dealing with someone who's high to show up and take some of that burden off the police? So I think if we look at it and realize so much of what both those in law enforcement have advocated and those now who are advocating for refunding, refinancing, there actually is quite a bit of synergy between the two. And we're not as far apart as those who want to use this as a political wedge would lead you to believe.
Yeah. And that's you didn't bring it up, but the other argument that I hear is, that these are just bad apples, that there's one bad apple in the bushel. I was, and I've been thinking about why that troubled me. Why did the bad apple argument trouble me so much? And my dad was he was a farmer growing up. They had to grow their own food in Ethiopia. When we came here to the United States, we had to go to the farmer's market, to get our produce, and he'd rather buy it from the farmers than he did. He didn't want to buy it at the grocery store. And we went there, and when we get to the farmers market, it was a delight. He loved going there because it reminded him of the markets in Ethiopia, And so he'd go there, and he loved bargaining with the farmers, and saying, you want $7 for that bushel? How about I give you, 5, or how about I buy 2 for 12? So he enjoyed that part of it. But he looked over, even when he would buy a bushel, he'd look at every single apple, and it's kind of like, if you're the only apple farmer in a town where nothing grows but apples, and your customers have been complaining for years that there's one bad apple in every single bushel that they buy, and the one bad apple in each bushel is so bad that the unknowing person just eats it, and he or she dies. And each time your customers complain, you sent them flowers and you sent them a note that said, my thoughts and prayers are with you and your family, and you promise to check the picking and sorting system that you methodically, designed to help you produce as many bushels as possible, but you never actually checked. You never changed anything. It was one bad apple, like in the bushel, and you were selling too many of them to worry. Well, eventually, what are your customers going to do? They're going to get tired of complaining about the one bad apple, and they'll despise you for not listening to them. And they're going to resent the way that you dismiss their daily struggle to avoid the bad apple. And eventually they'll stop saying thank you for selling them.
But the other thing, Amos, I think it's, whether it's allegory, metaphorically, it's easier for us to dismiss this if we think of it as a bad apple, because, it's not so bad. The rest of them are good. And, I have to be careful with invoking Chris Rock in a church-sponsored event.
Right.
But if you remember Chris Rock's monologue, he did, there's a lot of genius in comedy. And he says, I've had a lot of bad apples. It kept me up at night, but it didn't choke me out.
Yeah.
And one, we have to stop that reference. These aren't bad apples. These are criminal deviants who have no place in law enforcement and should be rooted out and have taken from them the privilege of carrying the gun if they cannot respect the life and dignity of the people that they serve. But you asked, one of the things I learned, though, separate from the issue of race, was our police chief, Chief Click's greatest concern was, you mentioned your dad growing up as a farmer, where 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, 25 years ago, most people who learned about firing weapons learned from their grandfather, their father, shooting on the farm or hunting. But even when I was mayor in 95 and 2000, we were getting the first generation of what we call video cops. These are kids who learned how to fire a weapon hanging out at Dave & Buster's or an arcade or playing video game. And the mentality is, you pick up that play pistol and you've got however many rounds, and you just hold the trigger and you never let it go. And when you get ready, you reload. Well, it may sound comical, except for on the street, all of a sudden, these kids are in a circumstance. And the one thing I always try to impress when I speak to young African-American men who are legitimately angered about this, the one thing you have in common, believe it or not, when you have with the police, everybody's scared. Now, they just can't show it because they've got this macho, and it's unfair. It puts an added burden on us that we have to have to talk about what to say and what that. But you also have to understand, you're dealing with somebody who's scared to death.
Yeah.
And the only difference is he's got his finger on an automatic trigger. Yeah. And if he gets nervous enough and that finger twitches, you're dead. And so it is so complex when you integrate all of that into what happens in that moment, when you've got a police officer who, for whatever reason, is either frightened or prejudiced or carries a grudge or hate in his or her heart, and they're now dealing with someone that they think doesn't deserve the dignity and respect that someone of their own race would.
Yeah. I'll pause here for a second, see if you remember a story that somebody wanted me to share with you. There was a group apparently that called themselves the Wrecking Crew. I don't know if you remember who the Wrecking Crew was.
Absolutely.
But one of the members of the Wrecking Crew, Don Johnson, asked me if I would just check with you to see if you remember them. They apparently helped you bring your helped you with your campaign. And helped
we had a lot of great friends that went out and canvassed for us and hired, and we hired a lot of people that folks otherwise didn't think should be involved in politics, and got them engaged, and they called themselves the Wrecking Crew, and they were absolutely critical to my successful campaign when I ran. So Don, thanks for remembering me, and thanks for joining us this evening.
What are some of the differences between the perceptions and realities of how Dallas has dealt with race in its history? And
Well,
race
it's interesting. You would say, you asked that because one of the themes that I tried to draw on once I was elected, and I was curious, I think you told me you've already spoken with Mayor Rollins, but it'd be interesting to have him share, 95, it's a big deal. I'm elected. I'm the first Black mayor. I'm on everything from the cover of the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to it's so funny. My youngest daughter at the time, Amos, was only 3 years old. And my mother-in-law worked at the post office, as my father did, but my father passed years ago. And every time we were in a magazine, she'd call because she was a clerk and say, go get the paper. Your dad's going to be on Ebony or going to be on Jebony and Jet. And we came home one day from work, and our 3-year-old was home, and she says, Gandhi says daddy's on Jebony. And she's so but I would travel around, and then I had this opportunity, as I told you, to travel around the world promoting Dallas. And everywhere I went, every single country, from Europe to Africa to Australia, when I was interviewed by the local news about our trade mission from big, sophisticated Dallas, the first thing they would do would be to play the theme song from that TV show Dallas that was popular in the late 70s, early 80s. And then they would run a clip of the Kennedy assassination. And so then here I am. And I would always say to them, our biggest challenge is to get people to see Dallas today versus what you think we were 60 years ago, including Dallas. That yes, we did have a troubled past. Yes, we have these things, but now we're a modern, sophisticated city, a hub of technology. Well, our challenge is also still the same now. Yes, we are a modern, sophisticated city, enormously prosperous in some parts of our city. But sadly, there are still parts of West Dallas and South Dallas that look like neighborhoods that Al Lipscomb, L.C. Fay Higgins marched through 40, 50 years ago. And we need to own that. And that's part, America's problem with race is as much a problem about housing and education as it is anything. And as tortuous as school desegregation and busing was, the sad reality, most urban schools, most urban public schools in America are probably more segregated now than they were when we started, quote unquote, desegregation 45 years ago.
That's, that leads me to my next question, which is my denomination, the PCUSA, is 99% white, nationally, 99%. I just looked up the numbers today. And we usually, when we talk about progress towards a more racially just world, we use terms like diversity and inclusion. And I think this season that we're in has given us an opportunity to reconsider our measurements, about how we measure progress. And so I'd like to, I'd ask you, is diversity and inclusion, are those the right measurements for churches or any kind of community organization to be using when they think about creating a more racially just world?
They are a step in the right direction. Our problem in our churches, in our boardrooms, in our places of employment, we fall more in love with headlines than we do the substance of the work.
Right.
So, in politics, one of the cruelest sayings was, I don't need a bill, I just need a caption. Mm-hmm. So the president comes out yesterday and says, oh, I'm doing blank, 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 blank. And everybody's like, you can't do any of those things. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care. He knows the headlines are going to be that Trump says he's going to do X, Y, Z, even though there's no substance underlying. We cannot let that be our houses of worship. We operate, at least whether we are, Methodist or Presbyterian, Protestant, Catholic, we all operate from at least a common framework of some spiritual being who guides us, protects us, inspires us, but gives us at the core a fundamental charge that, at least in the Christian faith, we have to love one another as we say we love God. You know, and if you think about it, you know, one of God's few questions he asked us is, how can you say you love me and you walk by your brother who's homeless, who's hungry, who's starving, who's black, immigrant? And you cannot love a God you've not seen if you can't love your brother who you live with every day. So what I would say is, it's very comfortable to preach the words. We feel good. We have the banners. We have the inspirational posters. Now sit down and look at the reality and say, are we carrying this from us? And I struggle with the whole notion, you know, you shouldn't beat up on yourself about your congregation being 99% white. I mean, I've attended, for the most part, African-American churches all my life. And until I got to St. Luke, we were all black or all whatever. But it isn't what we look like inside. You know, the magic of our faith is not what happens in the walls of the church. It's what we take with us when we leave. Are we then willing to take that pledge of universal respect and love and dignity, and willing to walk into our workplaces and say, wow, you know, we are in a city that's 65, 75% Hispanic. How can I work in a real estate office and there are no people of color here, no Hispanics? You know, I used to drive the business community crazy because we would talk about how well we're doing. And I said, you notice every Thursday to the afternoon, the Dallas Morning News business page used to publish a list of all the executives who'd been promoted. I said, I challenge you to look at that for a month, much less 6 months, and tell me how many women, how many black people have advanced to that level of accomplishment. More than anything else, I tell people, you know, I would drive the chamber crazy, Amos, when we would go and promote Dallas, because I would tell people, you know, fairly crudely, you know, nobody moves here to be near the mountains or the ocean. We're in the middle of the country. We got this great airport. It's a great place to live, work. We have no income tax. You can raise your family. All of North Texas is a real estate play. We are the largest city in North America, not on a navigable body of water. Pick up Paper City magazine. Pick up any of these weekend magazines and look at all of the people involved in real estate. Find the black people, find the Hispanics. In a city in which real estate is our greatest currency, why are we not fully embraced in that wealth building of our community? And so this is not just about what words we use. We've heard them, we use them. This is about what's in your heart. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to speak up and challenge? And I grew up in a family church in every sense of the word. My mother was the youngest of 14 kids. Their parents died when they were little. She was raised by her older brother and sisters. One of my uncles got the calling in the old-fashioned way, not educated, but started his own church based on the Bible, the Church of the New Testament. 10 of my mother's brothers and sisters all lived within 5 square miles of one another. So we grew up in one church. We were in church all day, every Sunday night, every Wednesday. And like a lot of these little churches in the South, all of them had those big wooden block letters with scriptures on the wall.
Right.
And every Sunday, every service started with us all coming in, standing up and reciting John 3:16. You know, so by the time I'm a teenager, we're so tired that, you know, and at some point, somebody said to me something I'll never forget. And we were talking about John 3:16. We all memorized it, what it meant. One of my older cousins said, Ronald, you know what that really means. He says, God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. And I mentioned John Lewis, and you asked about what our charge is. Yeah. The reality is God uses people. He uses ordinary saints to do extraordinary things. Yeah. And this conversation, this journey about overcoming the vestiges of slavery and being a more equal America isn't going to be solved by Congress. It isn't going to be solved by City Hall. It's going to be solved by the 70, 80 of us that are on this call. Yeah. And people of goodwill, of good faith, and good heart, being willing to do what that 15-year-old girl did at her high school the other day and make a video and put it online and went viral. And then she got expelled from school, and I know you saw. Yeah. And I loved it. When they interviewed her, she said, you know, I thought it was time to make some good trouble. Yeah. So if we're not making good trouble, then the diversity and inclusion, they're just words on paper.
Right.
This is a time for action.
Absolutely. And that's part of the, you know, I think for the power that I have sensed in these conversations that we've been having is by talking about it as much as we have been doing, which is every Sunday night for the past, you know, I don't know, 2.5 months. We're claiming ownership and investment in the outcome. You know, like it's woven into the natural rhythm of our conversations here. And the more we talk about it, the more we find our place in it. We've always had a place in it. We just haven't claimed it. You know?
But we did look. I don't. This is a powerful thing you're doing. But again, and those who know me on the call know I'm always going to push. And we're people. At least we're all trying to be people of faith. And you know, one of the things we were also all taught is I'd much rather see a sermon than hear a sermon.
Come on. Yeah.
And I remind people, as a kid growing up, you know, during Jim Crow, I got called everything you could imagine. And that didn't bother me because my father he was like your dad. That was water off his back. He didn't care what somebody called him. He cared what people did. And what hurt me, you know, what I remember, and I've always been the kid, nobody's a stranger. I made a friend. You know, we were the first kids to go to this new junior high. And I think, Amos, I was 12 or 10, 11, 12 years old before I could go to a store. My mother could take my brother and I shopping and we could actually try on clothes. Mm-hmm. Because the worst of Jim Crow, Black people couldn't try on clothes. And I didn't know there was any way to buy a shirt but stand in a store and hold your arms out. And your mother would have to hold it up and see it fit. And so Hancock Center, right off 35 in Austin, opened, and Dillard's opened, and Lady Bird Johnson shopped at Dillard's. And old man Dillard's was so proud he had her cut the ribbon. Lady Bird Johnson made it plain that if everybody couldn't shop there, wasn't welcome, she wasn't going to. So that opened up Austin so everyone could shop. And I remember going to the mall with my mom, and we were finally able to go to Dell. And I saw one of my classmates that I had befriended, one of my white classmates. And we looked at one another, and I said hi to him, and he raised his hand to say hi to me. And his mother grabbed his arm, pulled him next to her, and put him on the other side and whisked him away. And it struck me at that moment that she was too afraid to let anybody think that her son had a Black friend. And I say that those are the memories that stuck with me more. It is the silence, it is the action, it is the complicity of good people who stand by and see something that they know is wrong, but we don't want to say anything because we don't want to make trouble at work. We don't want the people at my country club to think I'm liberal or conservative, or we don't want the women in my son. And it is that silence that feeds and nurtures that petri dish of racism and bitterness and ugly that still festers in our society. And until all of us, particularly all of us of faith, are willing to carry what we profess to in church every Sunday into our homes, into our workplaces, into our country clubs, into our social clubs, then we're going to be struggling with this for much longer than we should.
Yeah. You know, we've been doing, I said earlier, we've been doing these conversations at our church for, you know, at least once a week for 2.5 months. And, you know, as a country, we've been talking about this issue for much longer. You know, some of my friends, some of my white friends are still unconvinced that racism kills people.
That racism what?
That racism kills people.
Of course it kills people.
So how will we, as Black people, know that we have finally been heard?
Wow. I mean, that is such a big question. When we have equal access to health care, as everyone, when you say racism doesn't kill people, we are dealing with the pandemic now.
Well, I'm saying that, I've got friends
that is
that are
largely
convinced.
an issue of health care, but it's also because we know the disproportionate impact on poor people and people of color. If you are poor and you're Black and Hispanic and you don't have health care, and God forbid you work in a meat packing plant or you work in a grocery store, or you don't get a check and you don't do. And we as a society have leaders that say, you know what, you're an essential worker. You either go to work or you lose your job, but we're not going to provide you health care. We're not going to provide you gloves. We're not going to do any of the things we know they didn't do in those plants. That is such an act of environmental racism and health that has killed people as
Right.
it is in anything else.
Right.
If we know that children are exposed to lead-based paint or lead in their water, are more likely to have disparate health incomes or could lead to death. And we know the highest predominance of that is in neighborhoods that poor Black and Hispanic people have been forced to live in years, but yet we don't want to do anything to eradicate that. That kills people.
Right.
I mean, if you know that you have police who don't treat everyone the way they treat you, but you're willing to look the other way. When Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Tatiana, all those people are killed because you tolerate some bit of that, because you don't want to be seen as not supporting the police, that is racism. And it kills people. And it disproportionately kills people of color. If we are willing to see young white men march through the streets of Charlottesville, in Dallas, under the banner of the Ku Klux Klan or white nationalism or whatever, and instead of being able to confront it for what it is, buy into the argument that there's a lot of good people on both sides, you're buying into a system that legitimizes and normalizes. And we need to stop calling it whether it's racist and racism, and people have died because of that. And of course it does. And so, I mean, my only thing is I don't even want to, I'm so frustrated when I hear you say that, Amos, because I don't want to debate that anymore. We've seen it.
Right.
I mean, I don't know how much more evidence you need
Right.
of the harmful effects of that than what we have seen.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a little more time. If there's anything else that, if you've got questions for me, or if there's any question that you wish I had asked you but I didn't, now's the time.
No, I think I think you can see I don't have any problem filling the hour. I would defer to those who are on the call.
Right.
If they have questions, and if they don't, then we give them. There's nothing more precious you can give people than the gift of time.
Right. So, how do you, are there organizations that you would recommend in Dallas that are doing really good work, or in the Dallas area that would be important for to become involved in order to stand with people of color, Black people and people of color? Or do you?
God, there are so many things you can do. I start with the fact that the most important thing you can, first, one of the most important thing all of us can do, wear a mask, socially distant, but vote. The power to vote is everything. At the core of all these moments of progress and struggle in our country has been a battle for the right to vote. We're celebrating the anniversary of women's suffrage, and it coincides with us celebrating the life of John Lewis and the work of him. And I can't mention John Lewis without, we always overlook the courage of overcoming that moment in his history that President Lyndon Johnson did to force into law the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But the intersection of all these struggles is the power of voting. So one, if you aren't willing to vote for engaged, thoughtful leaders who are willing to take on these structural issues that hold people back,
Mhm.
then I think some of these other things can be Band-Aids.
Right.
But one thing that I tried to do as mayor was always told people, you're gonna stay at it longer if you do what's in your heart. If you care about kids, help kids. You know, I was a Big Brother in the Big Brother program for 15 years. I don't think you can ever go wrong investing in the life of a young person. The power to get an education, a degree, changes not only that child, it changes every person in their lives. I mean, my law firm was privileged to hear from the young Pakistani girl, Malala, who won the Nobel Prize. And her mantra is, one child, one teacher can change the world. Investing, it starts with investing in our young people. Stay engaged in conversations like these. There are a number of them. But I really want to challenge you to have this conversation in your home. Have this conversation at your job. Shine a light on you and say, instead of talking about what other people should be doing, when's the last time you've been to Southern Dallas?
Right. Yeah.
When have you spent any money there?
Yeah.
You know, when's the last time, you know, now I know, and I'm proud of our Colorado bridges, but for those bridges, and Trinity Groves, people are now experiencing West Dallas in a way that they have. Get out, know our city, know our people. Don't be afraid. Imagine if you lived in Southern Dallas writ large. Think of this. You would be in a city larger than the city of Atlanta by landmass and population without a single movie theater.
Yeah.
With probably less than a handful of Starbucks. You'd be angry too. So much of what we define as race is an absence of opportunity. And people ask what we want the same thing that you do.
Yeah.
And the bar cannot be as low as just asking you to stop killing us.
I
You
tell
know, it's got to be more than that.
got to be more. There's things that, I mean, you don't have to, we're not, you can begin with just thinking about where you spend your money, you know, and like that, my wife and I, my family and I we're trying to, you know, purchase a home right now in Dallas. And I was just looking at the list of all the different like professionals that we're going to ultimately end up paying, you know, along the way. You know, you've got, and that we had a choice, you know, as to who we would actually contract with for their services so that we can complete this transaction. We have a realtor, you know, a mortgage lender, a home inspector, movers, appraisers, you know, a closing attorney, a title company. So all these choices at any one of these points, you know, when as I was talking to Sarah, my wife said, we should check and make sure that we give ourselves the option to contract with a Black-owned business for each one of these steps along the way, you know, and just ask. And anybody can do that, you know. We often hear conversation around issues related to reparations. This is, no matter how you feel about reparations, you can at least choose, you know, about where your money goes. And
Yeah.
Black-owned businesses. So.
You know, I've always felt about the easiest reparations is fair housing and fair access to capital and access to education. And
Right.
I know your people don't believe it, but I mean, even now we know you can take the same two people, same color, going to get a bank loan. One goes through and the other one's not. You're still just, you know, stop the redlining. Yeah. Make sure we treat people the same. Give us all equal opportunity. And look, nothing would be better if you live in North Dallas in a big house and are paying too much in property taxes. Nothing would make your life better than a bunch of Black people having access to good jobs, building big houses in Southern Dallas, adding to the overall property tax wealth of the county. Right. Because if you're a white, wealthy homeowner in North Dallas, you are paying a disproportionate burden of our property taxes. So if nothing else, be selfish. Yeah. Be selfish about this. But look, I don't want people to come away from this feeling like you've got to boil the ocean. Just do what you can.
Do what you can.
Be the person. I mean, if you're listening to this, at least you are a faithful, reasonably interested member of First Presbyterian Church. And so the easy thing I would say is just, you know, as we say, put some feet on those prayers,
Right.
and put some work to our faith.
Yeah.
And we can make a difference. You'd be stunned the difference you can make with your voice by just speaking up against what you know is wrong when you see it.
Right. Well, I think I speak on behalf of all the good people, the good and faithful people at the First Presbyterian Church of Dallas, and in expressing my gratitude to you for being here with us tonight and for sharing your company with us. We're grateful that you are here, and we will take your words and we will let them simmer within our own community here. And I hope that next time that we get a chance to talk, there will be something that came of tonight that will continue to encourage you to have these conversations with.
Well, you mentioned the word simmer, and I can't let that go because I've had a great relationship with First Pres for so long. But thank you all for what you continue to do to care for the least of us through the Stew Pot and so many of your other ministries. That is an absolute jewel for our city and a lifeline, no pun intended, to many of our brothers and sisters that are the most in need. And I know there were lots of debates about moving that because people didn't, you know, everybody wants to feed the homeless, but they don't want to do it right downtown next to something else. But what you have done over these decades through that ministry is worthy. And on behalf of all of Dallas, I thank you for that.
Yeah. Let's pray and then we'll go to sleep. God of grace and God of goodness, thank you for the time that you've given us tonight. We ask your blessings of good, not just good health, but also peace among to Ron and to his family. Be with his family even tonight. Be with his work. Bring forth more hope, bring forth transformation, bring forth opportunity, and bring forth joy wherever Ron's life touches this world. Thank you, God, for this church. We pray, God, that you would continue to strengthen and encourage us for the work that you've called us to do on behalf of whosoever believes in you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Be well. Ambassador.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yes.
I know you didn't. There were moments I'm sure you were thinking, is this guy going to breathe?
No, look, I had my dad on here like 2 weeks ago, you know, and I was all wound up, ready to go with him. And I might have got like 2 words out of my mouth and he just kind of went to it. And he ignored me every time I tried to jump in and ask him a question. So, you know, I was like, I was well practiced, you know, in the art of listening on Zoom. And you had so much wisdom to extend to us tonight.
Well, I look forward to meeting you and your dad when this, you know, someday we'll all have to sit down and break bread. So
yes, sir. All right.
All right. Be safe and be
much.
well.
Bye-bye.
Take care.